Hello, everyone. Today we have the pleasure of interviewing Dr. Claudia Wedepohl, the archivist at the Warburg Institute. Hello, Dr. Wedepohl. Thank you so much for being here. Dr. Claudia Wedepohl is the archivist of the Warburg Institute. She has studied art, history, and Italian literature in Göttingen and Hamburg, and joined the staff of the Warburg Institute in 2000. Since 2006, she is responsible for the archive. She held fellowships at the Center for Literary and Cultural Research in Berlin and at the Center for Advanced Studies, Morphomata, at the University of Colonia. Her academic work focuses on 15th century Italian art, architecture, and art historiography around 1900. She has published widely on the genesis of Aby Warburg's ideas and key terms, with a special interest in his concept of myth and mythology. I'm very happy that Dr. Wedepohl has agreed to this interview because we are going to talk about the important topics of our project Unfinished Atlas of a Landscape in Process, the archive, Aby Warburg, and of course, her amazing work at the Warburg Institute. And Anna Maria Wash, in her book, Art and Archive, tell us that throughout history, many artists have relied on the archive to record, collect, store, or create images. And these images have become inventories, atlases, or albums. The archive is a point of union between memory and writing or art. So, Dr. Wedepohl, for you, what role has archiving played in history in general?
Oh, in general.
Yes.
Yeah. The archive is really the place where you can, it's a place for discoveries, I think. The archive I'm using most is the one I'm responsible for. But I've used other archives, and it's really something, it's unpublished material. I sometimes feel a little bit like a detective. Really patching together a story of which is partly known and partly unknown, and so filling gaps in history and having the excitement of reading really documents firsthand. And so it really brings people from the past back alive. And I got Aby Warburg, I got to know him so intimately, especially through his correspondences, his diaries. Sometimes you even feel you're going a little bit far beyond sort of into the personal life of a person, long dead, of course. That's the excitement and of course the role of the archive for me. And if you want to know what the archive of the Warburg Institute is, shall I go on, like telling a little bit of that about that? It's really the core, in a way, it's a core of the history of the Institute. It has all the papers which constitute the history of the Institute, with Aby Warburg's working papers really at the center. But it's an institutional archive, so it's not just his papers, it's not just the personal history in terms of documents of Aby Warburg. It's also the history is the institute, the administrational records, and the papers of other scholars who have been affiliated. And the reason why it has basically two origins. One is really the secretariat of an institution like the Warburg Institute and its predecessor, the Kulturwissenschaftliche Bibliothek Warburg in Hamburg. Mm-hmm. But it's also, it contains Warburg's working papers. Why were they considered as very precious by the people who moved them from Hamburg to London with his library? They were like in the middle of preparing his collected works in an edition, and they had just embarked on that and had just brought out the first volume of his published material, so collected in one volume, and the next would have been the famous Bilder Atlas Mnemosyne. So they were working, really preparing everything, and since the Atlas is the big summary of Warburg's life, everything he had ever written down on paper was going to have sort of some relevance for writing the commentary, but writing it as a sort of as a posthumous text. by the generation of scholars who were studying with him and working with him. So that is really the nucleus of the Warburg Institute archive, and how to maintain all his materials.
Okay, yes, I like to think the archive as an inert repository, and that thanks to historians and archivists like you, all this comes to life and makes sense. And what is the importance for you of the archive today, and how has the archive been taken up in contemporary times?
It's a lot of, so the interest in historiography has, I would say, increased once again in the late 20th century, and maybe even more in the early 21st century, after there was a kind of like, after a generation of scholars really made their main discoveries in the 19th century. So I would say the 19th century is the century of the archive, where exact historical research started. Like Warburg was one of the propagators of that. But it's a slightly different interest nowadays, as we have so many more work out in the world published. So the archive, again, is probably something I try to characterize in my first answer, a place of discovery, coming back closer to people like Warburg, or historical figures or historical eras, and maybe fill in the niches which haven't been filled, approaching materials with new questions, looking for new kinds of materials which probably in the past were not in the center of the interest of scholars. And if I come back to our archive once again, on why Warburg's why people need to get a sense of, to come to the archive to get a sense of what his work is about, is that it's hugely fragmented. So he published so little throughout his life and produced so much. His life was his work, basically. There was hardly a border between his Warburg, the private person, and Warburg, the scholar. So it was very much intertwined, intermingled. So he left so many papers, notes, sheets, drafts, lectures, which he gave extemporated, where we only have a slide list, an introduction, a summary, and the rest is a bunch of notes. So to really get to the bottom of what he was sort of after, his whole theoretical work, which he never considered ready to be published, it's all somewhere there in the archive. It's a large collection, but you have to patch everything together. You have to really look into the different departments to reconstruct his own laboratory in a way. Plus you've got his personal papers. So and the huge corpus of correspondences, which is perhaps it's basically the story of his life can be told through his correspondences, because that's the place where he wrote proper narratives and not just notes.
Exactly. Okay. It's incredible how Aby Warburg rethinks art history, and through this great archive that is the Nanoscene Atlas, which is articulated through different images that are united by a meaning. So what is the importance of the archive, not only in Aby Warburg's work, in Aby Warburg's work, how us take that importance in his work?
Yeah, so his own work was basically, and I already touched upon it, the archive was the huge corrective to a very narrowly, aesthetically sort of focused art history of his time. He really reformed art history, which was his discipline, which he studied. He was also sort of very interested in archaeology. That would have been the other discipline he would have liked to, well, he did study, but he didn't pursue. So he moved to Florence for a few years, just spending many months every year in Florence, having a sort of a place to live there. And he spent a lot of time in the archives, and he identified with 15th century Florentine individuals. He sort of saw in them the mirror of his own, Florence, a bit of a mirror of Hamburg. It's a merchant city, so the merchants of 15th century Florence sort of characters mirroring a little bit his own circles. And he got very much into the idea to reconstruct really, he saw the 15th century as a sort of proto-enlightenment, and to reconstruct the characters who really who shaped that society, what they thought. He was after this, what he called historical psychology, and tried to find documents unearthed so far, which would give him hints about about the thinking of these people, and what important, we come to his great idea, or leitmotif of the afterlife of antiquity. In which way did they identify with their sort of Roman, Greek ancestors, and in which way they interpreted antiquity, and sort of how that got into kind of competition with the sort of, the Christian world, which still dominated everything. So he had to really find documents to prove. And then this is again the idea of exact history, and do an art history which is inspired by the sciences, to find proofs of the hypothesis he was developing, or the other way around, just he found the documents and developed his hypothesis on the basis of that. And with his own, as I said, his own papers are the core of our archive. That has a lot to do with the idea that he was working on this sort of major life project, which in the end took the shape of the Bilder Atlas Mnemosyne, but he was really after a new history of civilization, I would say, in terms of expression, very much sort of with an art historical approach. And every study he ever did was part of a major project. And since this took shape sort of more and more with every year passing, he kept everything to basically draw the big conclusion at the later stage of his life. So everything was important, and everything was kept, and that's why he had his own sort of personal archive. Perhaps we nowadays would throw things away when an essay is published, so all your notes, everything you had written down in preparation is then obsolete. With Warburg, it wasn't. Everything was maintained and kept. And also copies of the correspondence of letters he sent out. That makes our archive very valuable, that we have copies of letters which the recipients never kept, or where we don't know where they ended up. So we have the copies of what he wrote, and what he received in response. Not 100%, but pretty complete. So the story can be reconstructed there too.
That's great. Yeah. And how did the view of the archive change in our history since the Bilder Atlas Mnemosyne?
You mean since last year when the exhibition was launched, or do you mean the atlas itself as a project?
The atlas itself, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. The Bilder Atlas, of course, the term Bilder Atlas is not really very new. When Warburg started to use it, is a term which was established in the late 19th century, but he interpreted this medium very differently. He used it to develop a method. To see it as an archive, I've got a bit of a problem with that. It's not, he called it an inventory, but more importantly, he called it a laboratory.
Okay.
And it was very much like the panels were work in progress. Of course, Warburg wanted to get them out, to get them published, to get his ideas through them published. But he very much struggled to settle on certain constellations. So it remained a fluctuous, work in progress, which not only he, but the whole community at his library were working on. And he wanted to really visualize his lines of ideas. And it worked much better as a pinboard, so to speak, rather than a printed book. We also know now it was probably not meant to be a bound book, but perhaps individual panels, loose panels, as rather than tables of a book. So there could have been sort of also that the sequence wasn't entirely fixed. So the Atlas is such an sort of in such way an unfinished work that it's so open to interpretation, and in such a wide range of recipients are interested in it because of this, and feel that it speaks to them. But in a way, it's also it's the essence perhaps of its own collection of photographs, but using them really to tell a story, a historical story, plus trying to get across his theoretical ideas about the formation of symbols. So to do both in one sequence of images, it was probably impossible to do that convincingly in something which would then have been ready to be printed as a book and still would have maintained his ideas or be able to get these ideas across. And we don't have his commentary. So that's the big gap in everything.
Exactly.
Which leaves it very open. I'm convinced we could reconstruct from all this sort of individual case studies he has done. We could reconstruct a commentary to a certain extent, certainly. Yeah.
Okay. When we are studying art history, we read a lot, but that's with the Atlas that don't happen because it's all of images. And it's amazing how through images you can study to different times. And in the case of our project, it's precisely that what we are doing is a visual form of knowledge. And I think that it's fantastic. And I'm very curious to know this, and how is your work at the Warburg Institute, and what do you do? Because
okay,
I think it's every historian's dream.
Maybe in a way, but I think perhaps next to the director, I feel I have because of the biggest spectrum of things I have to do. In theory, I'm on my own responsible for the archive as a department, but in practice, I do have somebody who's helping me, sort of an assistant. So we're working together. The archive, every archive needs to be catalogued to be accessible. So the Warburg Institute archive has been functioning as a department only since the early 90s. So I'm the second archivist responsible for the collection. So we're still cataloging, but we're slow because there's so much interest in the archive that most of my time is taken up by responding to requests, very much by email. We have got a lot of users. Many of them, I would say the majority, is still coming to see Warburg's papers.
Wow.
So in a normal year, we are in COVID now, we have hardly any users because they mainly come from overseas. So we do have around 100 users per year. That is a lot because nobody just stays for one day. They stay, some even stay for weeks, several days. They need to be served, like they cannot fetch, so somebody has to look after them. We're doing reproductions, not that many, but especially photographs we hold, so we need to process orders. But I'm also, I think most of my work now is promoting the collection. For example, in the past almost 2 years now, it is 2 years now, I have been mainly responsible for getting the Atlas exhibition, which was which opened in Berlin about a year ago, and then now it's currently at Bonn and will be in Hamburg. It's a lot of work. I'm not the curator. I'm responsible for our side of the institute, but there's a lot of administrational work. It's registrar work.
Of course,
so we have registrars. We don't, but there's now we have got these objects which the world is interested in, and we're lending them. I do a bit of teaching.
Okay.
I do introductions to the collection and do something a bit similar to what I'm doing here now, and on site showing also samples. I'm part of the community. I'm also sort of working together with my colleagues at the institute, with the institute's events, things like that. So it's very, very broad.
Okay. Well.
And I'm doing my own research. That I forgot.
Of course.
That's what closest to my heart. And you introduced me as a scholar, and I'm also doing, and I'm editing Warburg's. Actually, that is something I should have mentioned. Okay. We're still sort of preparing one of the important volumes for Warburg's collected works, which was scheduled in 1932.
Wow.
Is sort of listed in the book, in the list of volumes which were meant to come out. And that is difficult because many of these texts aren't proper texts. They have to be reconstructed. They're in fragments, and so the commentary and introduction is quite challenging, but important to place these texts in Warburg's sort of within the framework of his life's work.
Yeah, that's a big work. Yes, it is every historian's dream.
Yes.
Yes. And
they're also boring things. Not everything is exciting.
Well, but for me, that's
a good job, I suppose.
For me, it's like a dream. I don't see that like boring or something like that. It's amazing, and we are constantly changing and becoming more and more a visual culture. That's why I believe that every day the builder Atlas Inconcluso becomes more meaningful and the archive more important. So how do you perceive the archive in the future, specifically the archive in the Warburg Institute?
Yeah, okay. Well, there's a huge demand to have more things available digitally. It's not as easy as it sometimes seems that you just digitize, because if you do it properly, you have to really build up a catalog, you have to build the metadata, and you have to maintain the digital files. That's why I wouldn't even say slow. We haven't really adopted a digital policy, but I can see that will be part of the archive of the future. We have entirely catalogued Warburg's correspondence, so that's the sort of best catalogued part of the archive. These are 38,000 letters basically, so every letter from Warburg's lifetime, of which he himself has written 15,000. The database is online, and you have got abstracts. And the next step would be to put a digital file to it, so that so we have metadata for these. So I presume it's also a little bit the question of the future of traveling. So we're getting into very big questions here. Like, are people going to be as mobile as they used to be pre-2020? So yeah, that is another question of having things many more things available digitally. But at the moment, I think it will go on. Like, people will keep being interested until some point in the future where everything is available, but then new interpretations, new questions will come up. So in general, I don't see a big change in our role.
Okay.
The Warburg Institute Archive and Warburg's papers have been compared to Benjamin or other sort of important similar figures, 20th century thinkers. it's a different situation because we have got this huge archive. So Warburg published little, and little has been published, or fairly little, posthumously. But so the archive, as long as we're in the process of getting editions out, the archive will play a role. And yeah, and the interest is there. So yeah, and the future of the archive, I think interest will shift in different fields, so other archives will become more important. And let's say Renaissance Italy has been very, very well researched in the past years. So that is something which perhaps is less of a focus these days. But then also material culture becomes interesting. So we've got the Institute has a huge photographic collection. It's another archive, but it's not the archive of the Institute. It's a photo archive. Okay. And somehow, like, these material photo collections have become seem to have become superfluous. Other institutions have thrown them away because they needed the space. But now people are getting interested in sort of the materiality of these documents. Like, lots of, they have a palimpsest of inscriptions. Each and every photo, you can see the history of scholarship on each and every object. And how sort of, the history of art history developed in the 20th century through the media. So I think there will always be a new interest in original materials. That, and I can't see an end to that for now.
Okay. For me it has been a pleasure because I learned a lot in this conversation, and I'm more interested in Warburg's work, and I am very grateful for have the opportunity to know you on your amazing work. And
thank you.
I would like also thank to Professor Bill Sherman for his interest and receptiveness in our project. So thank you again, Dr. Wedepohl. I'm so happy with this opportunity.
It's amazing how many people are interested, and the sort of the circle has become bigger and bigger, and South America has really been sort of the interest in Warburg in South America has been visually increasing in the past, I would say, decade, maybe even less.
Here are a lot of works based on Warburg, so it's amazing being part with our project of that. And
more and more sort of works want to, like, I'm approached by publishers who want to publish works in Spanish, in Portuguese. So
yes. Well, thank you very much. And well, I want to thank also. Thank you. I also want to thank the Goethe Institute and Espacio Proyecto Libertad y Tráfico Visual. The Goethe Institute is our support in this project, and it's incredible have the opportunity to work with them. So I think I am going to keep in touch with you because I love your work. I'm like a very big fan of you. I've seen a lot of conference on YouTube, especially on the Warburg Institute channel, and I saw you with your conferences, and well, it's like a very amazing opportunity for me. So thank you very much, Dr. Wedepohl, and until our next time.
Okay.
Okay.
Until next time.
Okay.
Good.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.